Yesterday was a very eventful day for British heavyweight contender Dillian Whyte. He was at a press conference. It was the press conference to announce the fight between George Groves and Martin Murray, and it also doubled up as the Matchroom announcement of their signing of Dillian Whyte to a 5-fight deal, by the way. Obviously, I've done a video about this before, but in my previous video about Dillian Whyte being signed to Matchroom, I didn't know how many fights the deal would be for. It's actually a 5-fight deal. So Whyte yesterday ran into Derek Chisora behind the scenes, and IFL TV captured the incident. Apparently the incident went on for like 15 minutes, so they only caught the tail end of it. And it was a clash between Chisora and Dillian Whyte behind the scenes. Some people were saying Dillian Whyte looked shook, he looked scared and intimidated by Chisora. Well, I think you have to put everything in context. As I said, it was only the tail end of the full incident, so we don't know what went down before then. Although I've heard, people talk about what was actually going down before then. Derek Chisora talked about what went down before the cameras were rolling. But either way, Dillian Whyte was at a press conference. All the Sky people were there. Adam Smith was there, the head of Sky Boxing. So he's effectively signed to Sky and Matchroom with all these big suits there and what have you. So I think Dillian Whyte was trying to be on his best behavior in front of those people. If he'd actually got into fisticuffs with Chisora there and then in front of all the Sky people and the Matchroom people, probably wouldn't have gone down too well. Now, Chisora, I mean, he was also there, obviously, and his promoter was there, Sauerland. He didn't care about getting into an altercation, obviously, but, there are different levels here. Chisora's coming off a loss, so maybe he just feels like, to hell with it. And he's at a different stage of his career, too. After the altercation, Dillian Whyte, and Derek Chisora's put this out on social media, Dillian Whyte started messaging Derek Chisora privately saying, you know what, if you want to meet up and let's have a straightener, basically, a street fight, a fist fight, let's do it. You know where I am, you know my number, call me, let's do it. This ain't the first time that Dillian Whyte has done something like this. Dillian Whyte is no fool. I'm telling you people. Yeah. Anybody who knows Dillian, who is from Brixton, who knows of Dillian or anything like that, Dillian is not a fool. Yeah. And when I say fool, I'm talking about this is not a guy who is, easy to back down in the street situation. He tried to fight Anthony Joshua in the street on several occasions. This guy called up. I think he either called or texted Anthony Joshua. This was before they fought, several months before they fought, and said, if you want to sort this out, let's meet up in the street and let's do it. And he was very serious. When he was in the Klitschko camp, when him and Joshua were both in the Klitschko camp, again, he told Joshua, come outside and let's sort it out. If you want to have a fight, let's do it now. Forget about the boxing. Let's have a real fight. That's how Dillian Whyte is, people. Yeah. He grew up as a young teenager and whatnot in Brixton, fighting on the roads. So he's not scared of none of that. Don't be fooled and think, oh, he shook a Derek. He's definitely not shook a Derek. When he had very few amateur fights, before it was either just before or just after he turned pro, but he was extremely inexperienced. He sparred Derek Chisora. Speak to Spencer Fearon, he'll tell you. He sparred Chisora, and according to Spencer and, other people that were there and witnessed the spar, Dillian Whyte got the better of the spar. And this is when he's got virtually no boxing experience, and Derek Chisora was a pretty experienced pro. So he's not intimidated by Chisora in the slightest. And in a street situation, I mean, we don't know what would happen in a street fight. We do like fighting, obviously, people, because we watch boxing. In a street fight, I'd be rolling with Dillian, man. I think Dillian would smash Derek up in a street fight. Dillian comes from a kickboxing background, and he's also done some MMA as well. Derek ain't never done no kickboxing and MMA. So Dillian's done kickboxing, MMA, and boxing. And he's had street fights. So I think he's a more rounded guy in terms of his fighting ability. And worst comes to worst, he get Derek in a chokehold or an arm bar you know, put him to sleep or snap his arm like a Kit Kat. So yeah, don't try take Dillian for idiot, man. He's not an idiot. And in that situation with Derek, just my opinion, in that situation, as I say, he was trying to be on his best behavior. All the Sky bigwigs were there and Matchroom and all that type of stuff. Dillian had his suit on and whatnot. Interesting why Derek Chisora turned up to the press conference, though. He said he wanted to see his promoter Sauerland. Maybe there just wasn't a more convenient time to see his promoter, or maybe he had some type of problem with them. I don't know. But I'm sure the Sauerlands are already feeling like, was it the right thing to do to sign Chisora? Because he's definitely can be a headache. And ever since being shot of Frank Warren, he seems to be off the leash again, back to the old Derek Chisora, the carefree, random, bizarre human being that he is. He is quite fun. It's like he's not down or dejected since losing to Pulev. He said it was a fun fight and he liked the rematch. As for Dillian, he was asked questions by the media about Dave Allen. That's another guy who's been talking about him, as well as Derek Chisora, as well as David Price, as well as David Hay. And Dillian Whyte says he's open to all those fights. He says he just wants to get a few comeback fights to get himself, you know, a rocking and rolling again. And then, yeah, he's happy to fight Chisora or a lot of these domestic guys, David Hay, later on this year. And he says he's shooting for a rematch with Anthony Joshua in 2017. Now, the Dave Allen fight, that'd be a fun fight. That'd be hilarious. He said he was actually willing. And again, these are interviews. You could go look on YouTube. Just type in Dillian Whyte interviews for the past 24 hours or the past week or whatever, and you'll see him talking about Dave Allen and all these people. And he's saying, you know, he's willing to drive up and again have a street fight, a straightener with Dave Allen if he wants, if he wants it. And trust me, people, when Dillian Whyte is saying this kind of stuff, he's not joking. If you know about Dillian Whyte, you know he's not joking. And Eddie Hearn is going to have to, you know, fight pretty hard to stop Dillian engaging in this kind of stuff. We don't want Dillian getting in trouble. So there's fights there for him. Derek Chisora, Dave Allen, they'd be fun fights. Chisora's saying he wants Dillian to have more before he's willing to fight him. He says, you know, he wants Dillian to have some type of title. He wants money, this, that, and the other. He said he don't want to fight for the British title. Dillian needs to have more than that, European title or some type of intercontinental belt. Then he'll want to fight Dillian. So, you know, make of that what you will. Interesting, actually. I mentioned this, I think, before the Joshua fight. And one of the videos I made before the Joshua fight, I mentioned the fact that I had received information from somebody several months before the Joshua fight that Dillian Whyte had been dropped in sparring by Derek Chisora. And at the time I said, I cannot verify whether this is true or not. It's just a rumor. But the rumor is that there's been a video going around of Chisora dropping or knocking out Whyte in sparring. And again, it couldn't be verified. It couldn't be vetted. But if you watch the confrontation between Derek Chisora and Dillian Whyte on IFL TV, you'll notice that Derek Chisora says, I've got the videotapes, or I've got the DVDs. I've got the DVDs. Was he referring to the incident I talked about several months ago? This rumor going around that Dillian Whyte was dropped or knocked out by Chisora in sparring. Is that what he was referring to? I don't know. Interesting. Again, and I've said this before, even if he did get dropped or knocked out by Chisora in sparring, him and Chisora have sparred loads of times. And to my knowledge, that would have been the first time that he got dropped by Chisora if it happened. And believe you me, all types of crazy stuff happens in sparring that never gets out to the public. Very, very good fighters end up getting dropped and knocked out by people that you would imagine could never drop or knock them out. And when you think about the amount of rounds that fighters spar in the gym, okay, they do far more rounds in the gym against far more different people than they do in the professional ring. Yeah, we're talking about rounds boxed. The vast majority of rounds boxed of a professional fighter are boxed in the gym, behind closed doors, not out in the professional boxing ring. And it's a numbers game. The more rounds you spar, eventually somebody's going to drop you. You know, Mike Tyson was dropped in sparring by Greg Page. He was dropped in sparring by Oliver McCall. You know, Mike Tyson in sparring, he sparred Glenn McRory when Glenn McRory was a skinny, God, I don't think he was even a cruiserweight at the time. I think he was light heavyweight. And he didn't even drop Glenn McRory in sparring. I think they sparred about 90 rounds or 100 rounds or something like that. He didn't even drop him. And when I mentioned that to some people, they were surprised. They were shocked that Glenn McRory was able to stand up against Tyson in sparring, because Tyson was notoriously vicious in sparring and would try and knock virtually everybody out. But Glenn McRory did these 90 rounds or whatever and never came close to getting dropped or knocked out. So, you know, crazy stuff that you wouldn't expect does happen in sparring. Oliver McCall said that the only time he's ever really been hurt in sparring, and remember, Oliver McCall was one of Mike Tyson's main sparring partners for several years, sparred hundreds of rounds with Tyson, never got dropped. He said the hardest he ever got hit in sparring was against Burt Cooper. He said Burt Cooper really shook him in sparring. And people would think, wow, how the hell could Burt Cooper shake him in sparring when Mike Tyson couldn't? Again, crazy stuff happens. There's been rumors for many years that Freza Kendo dropped Vitaly Klitschko in sparring. Again, people were thinking, what? Freza Kendo? That can't be true. Vitaly Klitschko has never denied it, people. So trust me, crazy stuff happens that people would not expect behind closed doors when you're sparring hundreds of rounds in these training camps against multiple different sparring partners. You might get in there and you've just done 9 rounds and a fresh guy gets in. And he's not a particularly big puncher, but because you're tired and he's fresh, he manages to catch you and drop you. And he's somebody that shouldn't really be able to lace your boots. That kind of stuff happens in sparring to well-known fighters, believe me. So, yeah, anyway, went off on a little tangent there, but yeah, Dillian Whyte, interesting fights. Good move, in my opinion, for him to go to Matchroom. And who would you like to see him fight this year? Would you like to see the Dave Allen fight, the Chisora fight, David Price fight, David Haye fight? Because those are the fights that he's talking about for this year. And next year, all culminating in that rematch with Joshua, if he stays unbeaten during that run. And that's not a foregone conclusion, particularly talking about fighting people like David Haye. That's a serious fight. Even somebody like David Price, if he can get his head right, that's a serious fight for him. I know David Price is very vulnerable, but if he can box correctly and sensibly, he's still a problem for a lot of people. I'm telling you, David Price, okay? It's when somebody sticks it on David Price, that's when there's a problem. And obviously Dillian Whyte would stick it on him, but at the same time, David Price has got tremendous punching power. So anybody who is defensively not quite there yet, you know, David Price is going to be dangerous. Would I pick Dillian Whyte to beat David Price at this juncture? Yes, definitely. But all I'm saying is, if Price manages to get past this test on Sunday, we'll see. You know, he's still got power anyway. On the domestic scene, I wouldn't be surprised if David Price pulled off a couple decent wins on the domestic scene. And just in closing for this video, Dillian Whyte has now got a new trainer. He's with Mark Tibbs. That's going to be his primary trainer. Jimmy Tibbs is the brother of Mark Tibbs. Excuse me. Jimmy Tibbs is obviously a very well-known British trainer, but Mark Tibbs will be doing the majority of the work with Dillian Whyte. Jimmy Tibbs is very old now. I was actually surprised to find out how old he was. I didn't realize how Jimmy Tibbs was that old. I remember Jimmy Tibbs from when he used to train Nigel Benn way back in the days. And apparently Jimmy Tibbs is like 71 years old now. So that's the reason he won't be doing the majority of the training for Dillian Whyte, because he's just too old to be able to hold the pads for some big, powerful heavyweight and whatnot. His hands and arms and joints probably wouldn't be able to take it. So Mark Tibbs is going to be doing the majority of the training. And Mark Tibbs, you know, interesting seeing him at the press conference and talking and whatnot. He seemed like either he's not a very articulate person or he had stage fright, because Mark Tibbs was like a stumbling, fumbling, mumbling mess up there at the press conference. And to me, that was a little bit alarming, Because as a trainer, you need to be able to communicate effectively to your fighter. It's no good having all this knowledge in your head if you can't convey it effectively, clearly to your fighter. You know, you have to be able to put your point across and get your fighter to understand what you're saying. You have to be able to articulate yourself well. And the fact that Mark Tibbs can't do that, at least not publicly anyway, in front of the press, I'm a little concerned about that. But again, that's in front of the cameras. Maybe it was just a little bit of stage fright. And maybe he's just not used to public speaking. And, you know, a lot of people get like that when public speaking. But behind the scenes, they're perfectly fine. So maybe it's just that. Let me know what you think about everything I talked about in this video. It's your boy Hatman. I'm out.